Imagine you are an ambassador in the late 1500s. You have traveled across seas and hostile borders to stand in the presence of the most powerful woman in Europe, Elizabeth Tudor, Queen of England. You expect majesty. You expect magnificence. And at first glance, you see it, the light spilling through stained glass, catching the silken folds of her gown, the jewels glinting on her neck like fragments of heaven. She stands regal, commanding, the Virgin Queen whose very image is a weapon against enemies abroad and dissent at home. And then she smiles. What greets you is not radiance but horror. Blackened stumps where teeth once gleamed, gums swollen and oozing, a stench so foul your eyes water and your stomach knots. Diplomats would later write that her mouth was like a battlefield after the slaughter, corpses clinging stubbornly to the ground. One Spanish envoy whispered home, "She is majestic, yes, but her mouth is a cemetery." Elizabeth's decay was not sudden. It was the slow, insidious rot born from one of her greatest pleasures, sugar. In her 20s, Elizabeth developed a love for white crystals imported from England's colonies in the Caribbean. Sugar was more than food. It was status. To consume it daily was to announce to all the world that you commanded fleets, colonies, and wealth that few could rival. For Elizabeth, sugar was power in edible form, an imperial luxury she savored without restraint. And yet, that indulgence carried a silent price. Toothbrushes existed, but they were crude affairs, cloths rubbed against teeth with ashes, soot, or crushed rosemary. Some nobles experimented with coral powder, vinegar rinses, even urine. Elizabeth, however, favored honey as a supposed protector of her teeth, not realizing it hastened their destruction. By her 40s, many of her teeth had already fallen out. What remained were jagged ruins, black and broken, each meal a fresh agony. Meat had to be boiled into mush. Bread softened until nearly liquid. At banquets, she turned her head to conceal her suffering, her once golden laughter replaced with controlled, silent gestures. Her attendants urged her to seek treatment. One physician recommended an extraction, but Elizabeth refused, pride outweighing pain. Another tried to prove his method's safety by pulling one of his own teeth before her. He screamed, collapsed in blood, and Elizabeth, jaw tight with hidden torment, dismissed him. For Elizabeth, the matter was not only medical but political. In a court where men doubted a woman's right to rule, weakness could not be shown, not even the weakness of a decayed tooth. She endured infection and agony in silence, refusing to reveal a chink in her armor. Still, there were limits to endurance. The stench of her breath became infamous. Courtiers described it as worse than a chamber pot. Dignitaries coughed through her speeches. Her words, once so commanding that Shakespeare himself adjusted lines to match her cadence, began to slur, her oratory dulled by the cemetery in her mouth. And yet, in portraits, she appeared serene, radiant, immortal. That was Elizabeth's great illusion, a woman whose body betrayed her daily, yet who understood better than anyone that image could be stronger than truth. She tucked rose petals into her mouth to mask the odor, chewed cloves to sweeten her breath, and commissioned silver utensils to reflect false light when she smiled. But no silver gleam could hide the infection spreading through her gums and into her jawbone. This was the contradiction that defined her reign. To her subjects, she was Gloriana, goddess, warrior, virgin, ruler chosen by heaven itself. But to those who stood too close, she was flesh in slow decay, a queen who carried death behind her lips. And yet, Elizabeth endured. She understood what few rulers ever have, that perception is power, and that to falter in appearance is to falter in authority. Better to carry a mouth of rot than to let her enemies glimpse weakness. Better to be remembered as immortal, even if her body whispered otherwise. Elizabeth's mouth was her first mask, her first grave. And it was only the beginning. For most of us, water is life. It is renewal, cleansing, purity. But for Elizabeth Tudor, water was death. From childhood, she had been warned, by tutors, physicians and priests, that bathing might weaken her body, that water could seep through the pores of her skin, poisoning the blood within. This belief was not born of superstition alone, it reflected the medical consensus of her age. Tudor physicians clung to the miasma theory, the idea that invisible vapors spread disease. To open the pores with water, they feared, was to invite sickness in. Elizabeth embraced this fear with an almost religious devotion. She came to believe that water was not a healer, but a traitor. And so, she chose not to wash. Instead, she covered. Each day her attendants layered her skin not with cleanliness, but with perfume. Vinegar and rose water, wine and oils of myrrh and sandalwood, musk steeped in cloth. 6 layers of gowns pressed against her flesh, corsets cinched her waist until the skin beneath blistered. Perspiration gathered, trapped, feeding rashes and sores hidden under silk. Yet the queen emerged radiant, cloaked not in purity but in disguise. Her chambers told the rest of the story. Courtiers described an air thick with incense, lavender sachets, and something darker, a sweet, sickly odor that clung to the tapestries and sheets. Servants begged her to change her linens more often, but Elizabeth resisted, claiming her body's natural scent was essential for her dreams. A French envoy recorded that entering her presence was like stepping into a garden left too long untended, roses mingling with decay. And when she did bathe, it was not to cleanse but to perform. Her porcelain tub, lined with golden cherubs, stood like a relic. On rare occasions, she allowed attendants to fill it with water, warm, perfumed, and blessed by priests. Petals floated on the surface, oils shimmered in the candlelight. Elizabeth would lower herself into this mixture and remain for hours, not scrubbing, not washing, but sitting, as though absorbing sanctity through fragrance alone. By the end, the water resembled soup, sweat, oils, and wilted flowers swirling together. Servants recoiled at the smell, likening it to funeral flowers steeped in sour milk. And still, she would not wash. She emerged wrapped not in towels but in satin sheets, skin left coated in layers of oil and residue. The illusion of radiance preserved, the reality festering beneath. It is easy to mock this today, but Elizabeth's choices were not unique. Across Europe, nobles feared water, preferring perfumes and powders to actual cleanliness. Bathhouses, once popular in the Middle Ages, had fallen out of favor, associated with sin, disease, and lust. In Spain, Catholic priests warned that bathing was immodest. In France, noblewomen wore pomanders, balls of scented herbs, to combat their own odors. Elizabeth was not an exception, but she carried the habit to its extreme. Her paranoia became so deep that when a physician attempted to apply ointment behind her ear, she accused him of sorcery and banished him from court. Water was the enemy. Sweat was purity. Perfume was salvation. Yet her body told another story. Beneath the layers of silks and oils, her skin cracked and flaked. Rashes bloomed on her thighs where corsets rubbed raw. Wounds festered in the heat. Flakes of dried perfume clung to her arms like scales. One ambassador, unable to endure, wrote privately that the Queen of England was a rose rotting on its stem. But no one dared say it to her face. Her odor was untouchable as her crown. This was Elizabeth's second mask, and in some ways, the most dangerous. She believed her scent divine, her rituals sacred. But the truth was spreading silently through her body. Infection, sores, hidden decay, things no perfume could forever conceal. And when even fragrance could not shield her, Elizabeth turned to another weapon: paint. When water became her enemy, Elizabeth sought another mask, one far more dangerous. If perfume could not cleanse her, paint would transform her. Her portraits still dazzle us today, the moonlit face, pale and unblemished, framed by fiery red hair, lips crimson, eyes steady, skin smooth as porcelain. To her subjects, this was not a woman but a symbol, a goddess carved in light. Yet behind that luminous surface lay a prison of lead, mercury, and ash. Elizabeth's beauty was no gift of nature. At 29, she survived smallpox, a disease that left her cheeks and forehead pocked with scars. For most women, such marks would have been cruel fate. But Elizabeth could not allow imperfection. She was the Virgin Queen, the eternal bride of England itself. A scarred face was not an option. And so began her dependence on Venetian ceruse, a thick white paste of lead and vinegar. Spread across her face daily, it gave her the sheen of untouched youth. Courtiers compared her to the moon, poets to goddesses shimmering under candlelight. Yet with every application, poison seeped through her skin, infiltrating her blood, her bones, her brain. It was a slow suicide she performed willingly, day after day. Ceruse was only the beginning. For blush, she used cinnabar, a mercury compound that brought color but also tremors and madness. Her lips were painted with vermilion, another mercury-laced pigment. For eyeshadow, she relied on lampblack, soot collected from flames. To dilate her pupils, she used drops of belladonna, deadly nightshade, which left her eyes red, blurred, and watery, yet entrancing. The result was both divine and grotesque. By her 40s, the skin beneath her mask had begun to crack and peel. Ulcers festered under the paint. Raw sores bled each time her maids applied another layer. To laugh could tear open her cheeks. To smile was agony. And still, the ritual continued. Her attendants whispered in horror. One maid later confessed that peeling away the layers of paint revealed flesh so raw and bleeding that she vomited. Elizabeth struck her for the insult. Pain was weakness, and weakness was treason. But Elizabeth's obsession was not mere vanity, it was survival. She ruled a court obsessed with purity and youth, where a single blemish could fuel rumors of decay, and where men circled like wolves, waiting for signs of frailty in a female monarch. To appear scarred, to show age, to reveal illness, was to invite rebellion. And so she weaponized paint. Her face became a battlefield where scars, wrinkles, and disease were concealed beneath white lead and crimson powder. Her mask was her throne, her divine illusion. The poison, however, did not remain skin-deep. Lead poisoning brought tremors that shook her hands, sleepless nights filled with paranoia, and bursts of rage toward her closest allies. Mercury dulled her mind, leaving her prone to suspicion and hallucinations. Her attendants noted her sudden mood swings, her sharp accusations, her weary gait. Behind the glowing portraits of the Virgin Queen was a woman unraveling, flesh burning, nerves fraying, mind corroding. Yet the painters never showed this. Portraits were propaganda. Artists knew that to depict reality was to risk their lives. And so they created illusions: flawless skin, vibrant lips, the eternal youth of a queen who, in truth, was rotting behind her paint. In public, she shimmered, radiant as marble. In private, she bled beneath her mask. This was Elizabeth's painted prison. Each morning, her attendants performed the ritual, layer upon layer of poison, sealing wounds, silencing truth, presenting a monarch untouched by time. But her face was only one mask. Soon, even her crown of hair, once the glory of her youth, would betray her. And in its place, she would adopt her most haunting disguise of all, a crown made not of gold, but of wigs, heavy, vermin-infested, and sacred. By the time Elizabeth reached her late 30s, another betrayal began. The brilliant red hair that had once been her glory, the flame that poets compared to sunrise and diplomats described with awe, began to fall. Clumps at first, then handfuls. Her scalp, poisoned by decades of lead and mercury, scarred by sores from the powders and pastes, could no longer sustain its crown. For most women of her time, this might have been humiliation. For Elizabeth, it was catastrophe. Hair was not merely beauty in the Tudor court, it was power. A woman's hair symbolized youth, fertility, divine favor. To lose it was to appear mortal. To appear mortal was to appear weak. Elizabeth refused to yield. If nature abandoned her, artifice would replace it. She turned to wigs, dozens of them, each more elaborate than the last. Some were curled in intricate spirals, others braided, some piled into towering sculptures dusted in powder to match her painted face. Pearls were woven through them, jewels gleamed, and the effect was otherworldly. She was not a woman but an icon. But beneath the spectacle lay horror. The wigs were heavy constructions, made from horsehair, goat hair, and, whispered servants said, even the hair of dead women. They were glued onto wire frames with mixtures of starch, eggs, and animal fat, substances that quickly soured, trapping sweat and rot. Warmth and filth bred life. Lice, fleas, even maggots wriggled beneath her crown. One morning, A horrified maid claimed to find white larvae at her scalp. She said nothing. To reveal such a truth was not only shameful but treasonous. Instead, she sprinkled lavender powder, set the wig back in place, and bowed. Ambassadors caught the scent nonetheless. Not perfume, not incense, something organic, something foul, a sweetness gone wrong. One Italian diplomat recorded cautiously, "The Queen of England adorns her head with a garden, though I suspect it grows more than blossoms." Some wigs were so large they became architectural challenges. Archways were carved taller so that Elizabeth could pass through. Her favorite was a towering red corkscrew style threaded with pearls. It weighed nearly 20 pounds. To bear its burden, she wore a steel collar that dug into her shoulders and back, leaving her faint and trembling. Yet she would not appear without it. Her wigs became more than fashion, they became relics. Each one was sanctified by priests before being placed upon her head. Strands that fell from them were collected and buried as though holy. Servants stood guard over them at night, protecting them as if they were treasures of the crown. They were, in a sense, her true crown, not the coronet of gold placed on her head at her coronation, but the artificial locks that convinced her court she was still radiant, still eternal. But the price was immense. Beneath the wigs, her scalp festered. Wounds oozed. Pins bit into her skin, embedding themselves into open sores. Infections spread. By her final years, her scalp was so ravaged that she required an iron mesh cap beneath her wigs to keep them balanced. The mesh cut into her flesh, leaving permanent wounds. Still, she demanded the wigs be reapplied even after fainting. In life, the wigs were her armor. In death, they became her shroud. Morticians refused to remove them, fearful of what lay beneath. Elizabeth was embalmed with her wigs still clinging to her ruined scalp, the last mask in a life built on illusion. The Virgin Queen's head, crowned with vermin and decay, became the ultimate paradox. To her people, she shone like the eternal rose of England. To those who dared look closer, she was a woman rotting beneath her crown. But her most terrifying mask was yet to come. For when her final breath left her body, the poison she had worshipped for decades turned her into something no priest, no painter, no perfumer could disguise. By the dawn of the 17th century, Elizabeth I had ruled England for more than 4 decades. She had outmaneuvered popes, assassins, and foreign armies. She had overseen the defeat of the Spanish Armada, guided her kingdom through religious upheaval, and presided over a golden age of poetry and theater. To her people, she was immortal, the Virgin Queen, chosen by God, untouched by time. But inside her chambers at Richmond Palace, the mask was unraveling. In her final weeks, Elizabeth grew silent. Once famed for her wit and sharp exchanges, she now sat motionless for hours, draped in velvet, staring into the shadows. She refused food. She refused sleep. She refused water. Her attendants begged her to rest. She shook her head. "If I close my eyes, I shall not open them again." She was right. Even as death crept nearer, the rituals continued. Wigs were placed upon her ravaged scalp. Paint was brushed across her sores. She demanded the mask be maintained, as though she could outlast mortality by sheer will. But when her final breath left her body in March 1603, the illusion collapsed with shocking speed. What years of poison had built, death destroyed in hours. Her skin blackened and swelled. Lips shriveled into tar-colored lines. Fluids leaked from her nostrils. Her neck ballooned grotesquely. Within a day, her chamber was filled with an odor so foul that guards gagged, and maids fainted. Roses, incense, and bowls of vinegar were placed around her bed, but nothing could mask the stench. It was as though her body, so long sustained by toxins and concealment, erupted the moment life released its hold. The horror spread to her coffin. The first, lined with crimson velvet, could not contain the odor. It was replaced, then replaced again. Yet still, the smell seeped through. Attendants rotated every 10 minutes while standing guard, unable to endure the stench longer. Even when the casket was carried through London streets for her funeral procession, the scent followed, forcing those closest to turn their heads as the people wept. Tradition demanded that her body be displayed before the public. But how could England's beloved queen be shown in such ruin? The answer was deception, her final mask. Wax was poured and sculpted into a flawless likeness, smooth and serene. A painted face covered the collapsed flesh beneath. Gloves concealed her blackened hands. Lace was drawn tight around her neck to hide swelling. To the thousands who filed past, she appeared peaceful, eternal. But to those stationed nearby, the truth was unbearable. Stains seeping through silk, the buzz of flies, the suffocating air. Her embalmers whispered of horrors inside. Her liver black as coal. Her lungs heavy with sediment. Her bones brittle and porous from decades of poison. Her brain they would not describe. Never had a royal body decayed so quickly. Never had a monarch carried so much death within her while still alive. And yet, the public never knew. She was interred in Westminster Abbey, laid beside her half-sister Mary. A marble effigy immortalized her beauty. Poets sang of her triumph. The Virgin Queen's image endured, untouched by decay. But in private, rumors spread that her tomb emitted a strange, sweet odor for years after, mistaken by some for sanctity. In truth, it may have been the last trace of a body consumed by rot. Elizabeth's reign remains one of the most celebrated in English history. She forged unity in a fractured kingdom, nurtured the arts, and projected power across seas. She turned herself into a myth. But behind the myth lay agony. She feared weakness so deeply that she chose illusion over truth, paint over skin, perfume over water, wigs over the bare scalp. She preserved her kingdom by sacrificing her body. Her tragedy is not only hers. It is human. For who among us does not long to preserve youth, to appear stronger than we are? Who does not fear the mirror's verdict? Elizabeth's flaw was universal, magnified by power. But few carried it so far. Few built a throne upon decay. And so she endures, majestic and monstrous, triumphant and tragic. The queen who inspired Shakespeare, who commanded empires, who terrified her own attendants with the smell of her presence. History painted her as a goddess. Reality reveals her as a ghost. Behind every portrait of ivory skin and fiery hair lies the truth. Elizabeth I was not immortal. She was mortal, fragile, and fleeting, her body crumbling beneath the masks she wore. Her story lingers as both warning and wonder. For power cannot stop decay. Beauty cannot outlast death. And even the mightiest crown cannot disguise the rot beneath.